it's been a year since Bernie Sanders released his criminal justice platform. And when you look at presidential candidates and you look at this, well, not criminal justice, but racial justice, we talked about the 5 types of violence, right? It was very robust, and of course arose out of the challenge, the pushback from those coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and had input and influence from other individuals that were connected with the campaign as well. And of course, we've seen the past week, the Movement for Black Lives has released a very thorough and comprehensive platform as well. So as we talk about work going forward, Shaun King has had this series that he's been doing about how to address the issue, basically police, reform, abuse, brutality, police killings. And I really think that if we look at these platforms and in the greater context of this overarching work that needs to be done, we can find opportunities for engagement and see where we can continue to move the needle, to do the work that needs to be done. I mentioned Tuesday night on my show in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they actually instituted some new administrative changes internally. The police department did. I don't really know much about the process, if it was driven by, outside community activism, which I surmise is probably, what happened. But, they made adjustments to their use of force policy and some other things that I think we need to look at, that type of model of looking at like local level action, right? I talk a lot about local level action. I talk a lot about, community engagement, acting locally, but there's so many organizations and entities out there that have already been trying to do this work, that have been doing this work on their own local level, that our voice, our resources, our nationwide networks can definitely help to further amplify these efforts and endeavors. So today, Shaun had a piece about looking at a strategy that basically meant that we need to go back to the SCOTUS. The Supreme Court needs to basically undo decades of problematic case law that disproportionately impact Black people of color in the criminal justice system. And not just in the criminal justice system, when we look at some of the standards of use of force and things like that, they've come out of case law. That's a huge challenge. It is definitely something that we are talking about internally, like really digging in and bringing together, leading voices and stuff to further address and discuss that issue. But so I don't know if you haven't seen it, Shaun King has had a series of, I think it's a long series of pieces he's been doing. He's had, I think, about a dozen pieces so far on this topic. And today's piece was basically going through like some of the changes in case law that have led to some of the conditions we now see in the way the legal system treats police officers, or behavior and engagement by police officers in the process. So one thing that I mentioned my godmother before. My godmother is a law professor, and she, former criminal defense attorney. She actually handled, she also did civil rights litigation. She actually handled some of the John Burge abuse cases out of Chicago. We had the Baltimore DOJ, scathing DOJ report. I mean, every time the DOJ has to step in with one of these, municipalities, cities, large urban districts, it's always a scathing report. Even though there are certain particularities to individual jurisdictions, there are a lot of commonalities and issues across the nation, right? It's almost like there should be some widespread review, but that will take a different conversation and a different set of actions to really actually have that in place. But the Chicago DOJ report is still looming after Laquan McDonald's murder and the subsequent cover-up by Rahm Emanuel's office and CPD. The Justice Department stepped in and not only investigated that particular, but they're doing a pattern of practice investigation to the Chicago Police Department. One thing that I've learned over the past year from looking at all this stuff was there was actually, a California case, maybe in the early 2000s, that and I need to do some more research. So any of my lawyers out there, if you guys are up for some legal research, and let's pull a group together and get some stuff moving on. But there was actually a case out of California, I think it was in Los Angeles, that looked at the LAPD and using the RICO statutes actually against LAPD. And that actually allows you to go back farther in your investigation than just the regular pattern and practice would. So that's really actually something that's very interesting. So there's a lot of strategies. There's a toolbox. I mentioned it before. I believe it's the ACLU actually has a community toolkit. It's an old handbook, but it's still very useful. Has a lot of really great strategies and stuff. So, I think when we talk about legal strategies and we got to take it back to SCOTUS, that's an old tactic. It is a tactic we see now used a lot by conservatives, but it definitely is something that was embraced by the civil rights movement. When we look at the accommodation line of cases, when we look at the housing cases, cases that led to desegregating housing, like CHA versus Gautreaux and CHA versus HUD, for example. I'm not CHA versus HUD. Gautreaux v. CHA and Gautreaux v. HUD. Those were litigated by my former senior counsel, Alexander Polikoff. So there's a lot of strategies out there, and we really need to start looking, instead of looking at for the magical strategy to alleviate this issue, we need to look at combinations of things, right? Because there's a lot of really great activism. People are driving conversations. People are getting changes made at local levels. People are getting conversations started and continued. But, a legal strategy is awesome too, but the legal strategy alone is not going to be the end all be all. Like our senior producer here at Benjamin Dixon Show, Progressive Army, posed the question earlier today, what is the difference between the civil rights movement and now? I think that is a really good question. And I think that we do need to reflect. If you guys haven't seen my interview with Michon LeBron about his one-man show Power, looking at the summer of '66 with Stokely Carmichael, you should definitely check that out. Because there's so much that, even though there's new issues on the table, there's new players, there's a new environment to some extent, at the same time, a lot of the issues, a lot of the games that are being played, a lot of the power plays that are being made are repeats of action that has already taken place, So it is worthwhile to look back, to kind of review and ascertain like what worked, what didn't work, and if there are differences between now and then, right? So these are ongoing conversations we're going to start having here with the Progressive Army. I can't necessarily speak for Ben's show specifically, but I'm sure this is the type of thing that Ben would definitely want to continue discussing. So that was just something that I saw from earlier today. And I really do think that I just saw a headline about a 14-year-old young man that was murdered out in California by the police. It gets to the point where, we can't just keep saying, well, if only someone, we cannot tolerate the conversation and the discourse to continue the way it has gone. In terms of so-called leadership, in terms of law enforcement entities, the statement from BPD from the Baltimore Police Department. I'm gonna say Baltimore Police Department or Baltimore PD because we have our BPD. Don't want to confuse us too, but the statement is childish and lacks any type of accountability and responsibility for actions taken. Interesting note, right? Like, so for a period of this time that was investigated by the Justice Department, Bratton, who was stepping down as the head honcho in New York, was some super high paid consultant. We see a lot of times with these police departments, you might, dismiss someone from one city and they end up being hired by another city, right? Or we might have issues in one place and then that person pops up someplace else, or they're acting as some type of private consultant or whatever. So basically, they've been spreading around these problematic, actions, standpoints, evaluation methods, training, all this stuff gets spread around and there's no accountability. Everyone's like, oh, well, we're going to try next time. How can we trust people who broke the system to fix the system? So this is definitely something we're gonna dig deeper into. We should definitely be reaching out to people like Liz Brown. If you guys are on Twitter, check out Liz Brown. Liz has this brilliant Liz Unpacked moment. There's a lot of people, but one thing, like I was saying with my godmother, she's done innocence. She runs the Innocence Project at her school. She's done a lot of work in this area. We've talked about how trying to get federal intervention, federal laws, SCOTUS strategy, that type of stuff, it's very difficult, it's very tedious, and that's a very long-term process to really undo what needs to be done. Not saying that we shouldn't do it, but we got to keep that in mind, right? We shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We We need to also consider the opportunity on local level, because this is a topic, just like with education, where local absolutely matters. There's so much work that can be done addressing city councils, mayoral offices, dealing with the police departments themselves. Like I said, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we'll see how that actually works. There's actually some really great activism in and around Minneapolis as well. But the opportunity to address administrative changes, you know, that's immediate. You know, if police departments change their policies and make it, for example, you know, impermissible to refuse medical treatment, that's immediate. That's punishable. That's like right there. So we need to look at all the different possible strategies and stuff going on. But that was just something I was on my mind from some conversations we had earlier. And it's definitely pressing because we continue to have these issues and incidences, right? We continue to have the police officer that shot the therapist down in Florida, who they said that it was an accident. They shot him because they was really trying to shoot his autistic patient. That guy's not going to be charged because it was a miscommunication. It was a miscommunication when you admitted that you were actually going to shoot his autistic patient instead. I mean, there are so many things that go on that we need to address.